What's going on, guys? Happy Monday, and with a new Monday comes a new announcement from MicroStrategy. And yesterday we had a post from Michael Saylor saying back to orange, meaning a Bitcoin buy. Strategy has recently acquired 1,229 Bitcoin at a price of 108.8 million, or an average of 88,568 per Bitcoin, bringing them a yield of 23.2% year to date. And as of this update that they gave us, they now hold 672,497 Bitcoin, acquired for an average price of 50.4 billion and an average price per Bitcoin of 74,997. They're on their way to 700,000 Bitcoin held and soon 1 million. MSTR chart-wise is also showing something interesting. We have the RSI starting to recover from its low in November, while the price actually went lower. This is a bullish divergence, and this is a sign that things may be bottoming out soon, and at least be due for a relief rally before we potentially do go lower. MSTR is now 71% down from its peak, a steep discount from where it was trading at roughly a year ago. And that might sound absolutely horrible until you realize that MicroStrategy has done, still at this point, a 10x from its crypto winter lows, versus Bitcoin's roughly 6 or 7x from its crypto winter lows. So it is currently outperforming Bitcoin from the bear market lows. I do think if this bullish divergence on the RSI doesn't play out and give us a little relief rally, perhaps Bitcoin sells off more than the market ignores this divergence. You got to realize MicroStrategy did recently hit new recent lows, and new recent lows typically bring more lows. I do personally like MicroStrategy at this price. The thing you have to realize, though, is if we are entering a bear market throughout 2026, we are likely to see much lower prices. But if you're on the fence, if you think this bear market might not be severe, if you're thinking things might play out differently for some reason, maybe MicroStrategy is worth starting to pick up here. I do want to add that MicroStrategy is approaching the 200 MA on the weekly, which is sitting at about $144. So we're a little over $10 away from that. I think that would be an important zone to get a bounce off of. One thing about the 200 MA is, if looking at last cycle, you'll see that MicroStrategy was under the 200 MA for roughly a year before it finally broke over it, or tested it at the least. So if you're thinking about accumulating MicroStrategy on the break of the 200 MA, just know that it might take a while. It might be a great time to accumulate throughout about a year, throughout multiple months, get a good average before we finally break over that 200 MA and start our next bull run. This is the time to begin accumulating, in my opinion. The whole of 2026, you should have a long time horizon to accumulate, not just look at it from like a 1 month perspective. You want to be buying throughout this entire year, especially if we do see a typical crypto winter. These are the times to take advantage. Now, I did want to look at two of my favorite Bitcoin miners, the most efficient in the game, IREN and CleanSpark. But first, I want to look at some interesting news coming from Japan. Japan is preparing a huge tax change in 2026, and it is limited in scope, but it will likely include Bitcoin, Ethereum, some of the major cryptos. Under its 2026 tax reform blueprint, Japan plans to cut crypto capital gains tax from as high as 55% to a flat 20%. Imagine knowing that if you invest in Bitcoin and Ethereum, that the government is taking half of your capital gains. That might make you avoid even bothering. So this, in my opinion, will open up a new set of investors that otherwise would just avoid crypto entirely. Getting a 20% capital gains tax rather than a 50% is a massive deal, but it won't be every single altcoin. Only about 105 cryptos currently listed on registered exchanges are expected to fall under this category, and other assets outside of the framework won't work, such as NFTs, and staking is still a gray area. Another change to this rule is introducing a 3-year loss carry forward. So if you take a capital loss, you can report that against your next tax season, your next one, and your next one, and offset any capital gains. Although losses from crypto trades will have to stay within that, meaning you can't offset gains from other asset classes. But say you lose a bunch of money from a certain altcoin, you gain a bunch of money from maybe Ethereum or Bitcoin, you can offset those gains from those that win with those that lose. This is definitely a big change coming from Japan, and it should, like I said, open up a new set of investors that otherwise would probably avoid crypto. The taxes on it are so high, it's going to eat into a lot of the gains that you could potentially make. So this is overall a good change and a step in the right direction. Now, I do want to take a look at Bitcoin, and something interesting happened. We did get a break over this trend line finally. And look at what happened too on this candle for today. We saw a quick run to the 50 MA and a rejection. This trend has been keeping Bitcoin from breaking out for quite a while. We finally broke through it You did get a nice reaction to test the 50 MA, but we got rejected. The positive though is we also saw a bounce on this descending trend, kind of a back test of it. Now it's up to the market to decide, do we come back down to this trend line? Do we come back and test the 50 MA? It is nice to see us finally out of this pattern, but it is a bit concerning that we just got rejected hard off of the 50 MA here. One thing I'm still anticipating from Bitcoin before we go lower is a test of the 50 MA on the weekly, which we have done in the past 2 cycles. And this is one reason I'd be very cautious on a relief rally. I wouldn't expect that Bitcoin's going to see new all-time highs until we can actually clear this 50 MA on the weekly. I do think we'll get a test of roughly 102,000 for Bitcoin. Anything further really depends on a break over this 50 MA, which every cycle, once you break under, it becomes a resistance and we continue crypto winter. Here it was a support. I mean, it technically broke under, but these are just wicks. There's not a body close under. Once we got a body to close under, we came back and tested it literally like 3 months later, 2 months later, and we found it as resistance. I think we are on our way soon to test the 50 MA. And then it's up to the market to either break over it, and then that gives us a chance to actually see some new prices in 2026, or possibly the more likely scenario, come up to this, reject, and follow out our crypto winter like we have throughout every cycle. And not just in the last cycle, but in the prior one to that as well. The 2018 bear market. We saw a break, the first break of the 50 MA, just look at that, and a test of the 50 MA before getting rejected and going down further. So this, in my opinion, is crucial to watch for. It could take us a couple of weeks, it could take us a couple months, but at some point I think we are going to test the 50 MA on the weekly, and that'll be the deciding factor. Do we break over it and see new all-time highs in 2026, or do we get rejected from it, start testing our lows, maybe head down to the 200 MA on the weekly at about 56K? Which would be a fantastic time to buy, an amazing time to buy Bitcoin. But that's basically my thought process with Bitcoin. You know, I'm leaning on the side of 2026 being a bad year, just like every crypto winter. Following the cycle, 2026 should be a down year, and that's what we should anticipate. But don't forget, that is a fantastic time to accumulate on any relief rallies. If we do see a relief rally to the 50 MA on the weekly, you want to prepare some cash. Be ready for the pullbacks. Be ready to get some amazing prices on Bitcoin, amazing prices on the Bitcoin miners. It may or may not happen, but you want to be prepared. Now, looking at IREN, I'm going to look at CleanSpark as well, give you my thoughts on upcoming earnings. They obviously completely depend on Bitcoin's direction, but one thing I see for IREN is a potential W or double bottom. If we see a retest of this trend line, a retest of this support, maybe get a bounce, head to the top of this trend line that was a resistance point for IREN. Throughout the entire cycle, from when we started at $1 in 2022, we respected this trend line until we had a massive rally, a lot of hype. Everyone's saying IREN's going to go to like $100 and something. People piling in with excitement in the 50s and 60s when it was clearly overbought. When it was time to be cautious, people were going in full force. Now IREN has cooled off pretty nicely, down almost 50% from its highs. What I think you want to do with IREN is watch for a test of this support. There really isn't much supports because of how quickly we ran and how strong this ran, but we do have this level that we did bounce off of, and when IREN broke over, we did back test it. You can barely see that, but we got a bounce and then a back test, and then we continued. So this support level needs to hold up. If we break this, we're coming down to 30, the psychological 30, which was a resistance, and we broke out of it. So there's another area the market might react to. IREN's 200 MA sitting at $26. If we continue to show weakness, in my opinion, right around the 200 MA would be a good time to start accumulating IREN. I think it's still time to be cautious. Now earnings is approaching. We're coming to the end of this year, meaning Q4 is coming to an end. And IREN, for one, is reporting Q4 in February. The thing you got to realize with Q4 is Bitcoin overall trended down throughout the quarter. It started the quarter at like 120,000. And we're ending the quarter here in the 80,000s. And while IREN doesn't outright hold their Bitcoin, they just sell what they mine, there are a lot of Bitcoin miners that do hold their Bitcoin, and they're going to be taking an unrealized loss on their Bitcoin holdings. One such stock is CleanSpark, with roughly 13,000 Bitcoin held. The thing is, when they gave this guidance, we were in like November when they gave this guidance. Bitcoin was doing a lot better. They were anticipating a profit. The thing is, Bitcoin saw a loss throughout Q4. These Bitcoin miners are going to see an unrealized loss on their Bitcoin holdings. Of course, the cost of operations, their margins are going to be worse because it's much more profitable to mine Bitcoin at 120 something thousand than mining Bitcoin at 80 something thousand. And I am anticipating a bad quarter for the Bitcoin miners based on Q4. One thing we do have going on for CleanSpark is this kind of a broadening megaphone pattern, you can call it. Starting back in April 2025 when CleanSpark was like $6, it has been overall in an uptrend. What I'm watching is this support, this roughly $9, nearly $10. It depends on when we bounce at it. If we test it more towards late January, it'll probably be right around $10. That would be nice to get a bounce. And kind of like iron, it would be a potential double bottom if we get a bounce there and see a run. Look for a bounce at $10, the psychological 10. If we break it, we'll be breaking this pattern. And then we'd be very likely testing the 200 MA on the weekly, which we did test on our last pullback here, the beginning of this W pattern. We did get a bounce right at the 200 MA. In my opinion, what the Bitcoin miners do completely depends on Bitcoin. I do think 2026 could be a great year to pick them up, to take advantage. Remember what 2022 gave us. These were fantastic times to accumulate the Bitcoin miners while everyone was negative about them, while they were down and out, while something like CleanSpark was under $2, while something like IREN was $1, while BTBT was 50 cents. These are the times you want to take advantage when everyone hates them, when people are complaining, when people are ready to throw in the towel. This is when you want to plan your attack. This is when you want to accumulate. Not when people are loading up on them in the 20s, for example, while they're overbought, after already everyone has gotten in. But long story short, the Bitcoin miners every proxy for Bitcoin is obviously going to depend on Bitcoin. Where does Bitcoin go in the short term, in the midterm? I do have a bearish bias with Bitcoin just based on where we are in the cycle. But keep in mind that this is the prime time to be accumulating, be looking for good prices, and be taking advantage of not just Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin miners, the altcoins, starting to accumulate throughout 2026. But let me know what your thought process is. Are you going to wait until more like mid 2026, late 2026, or are you just going to accumulate throughout 2026, try to get the best average you can, buy when there's fear, and prepare for the better times, such as 2027, 2028, when we get our next halving? It is right around the corner and it'll come in a blink of an eye. So take advantage while things are down. Take advantage while people are feeling down and out. These are always the best times to buy. Thanks as always for watching, guys, and I will see you next time.